On January 20th, 2025, a new era in US foreign policy began. President Trump signed an executive order. This order froze almost all US foreign aid. It was a sudden decision. This freeze had global consequences. African nations were hit particularly hard. They rely heavily on USAID for essential programs. The freeze affected over $1 billion in aid. This money was meant for vital programs. These included disease response, girls' education, and AIDS relief. The impact was immediate. Many organizations had to halt their operations. They faced a funding crisis. This disruption threw carefully planned programs into disarray. The freeze sent shockwaves through the development community. Uncertainty gripped many African nations. The future of their development plans was now in question. While the order allowed for life-saving exemptions, the reality was more complex. Implementation was inconsistent. Many eligible programs still faced disruptions. The waiver process, designed to provide exemptions, proved confusing and ineffective. Many requests were returned. They lacked specific details. This bureaucratic hurdle further hampered aid delivery. The freeze also created a climate of fear. A directive, interpreted as a gag order, prevented USAID contractors and staff from speaking publicly. This silence hindered information flow. It prevented open discussion about the freeze's impacts. This lack of transparency fueled uncertainty. It raised concerns about the future of US-Africa relations. Across Africa, the impact of the aid freeze was felt deeply. Sub-Saharan Africa, heavily reliant on US aid, faced a significant funding loss. This region received over $6.5 billion in US humanitarian assistance in the previous year. This funding supported critical programs. These programs addressed healthcare, education, and economic development. The freeze threatened to undo years of progress. The freeze did not discriminate. It disrupted programs across various sectors. In Zimbabwe, programs focused on child marriage prevention were put on hold. These programs provided education and support to vulnerable girls. They helped them avoid early marriage and pursue their education. The disruption put these girls at risk. It threatened their futures. In South Africa, the freeze impacted HIV/AIDS treatment programs. These programs provided life-saving medication to millions. PEPFAR, a US-funded initiative, supports 5.5 million people in South Africa alone. Even with its life-saving status, PEPFAR experienced disruptions. Facilities were forced to close, patients were turned away. These disruptions to HIV treatment, even short-term, pose significant health risks. Interruptions in medication can lead to drug resistance. This makes treatment more complex and costly. The freeze threatened to reverse years of progress in the fight against HIV/AIDS. It put millions of lives at risk. The USAID freeze has plunged Africa's development trajectory into uncertainty. It has thrown meticulously crafted plans into disarray. The freeze's most significant impact is not just the immediate halt of funds, but the crippling uncertainty it has injected into long-term planning. Before the freeze, African nations, in partnership with USAID, were making strides towards sustainable development. These plans, built on years of research and collaboration, addressed critical areas. These included healthcare infrastructure, education reform, and economic empowerment. They represented a roadmap for a brighter future. The freeze has brought this momentum to a standstill. The unpredictable nature of the freeze and the opaque waiver process make it impossible for organizations to plan effectively. They cannot secure funding for long-term projects. The lack of clarity on the duration and scope of the freeze amplifies this challenge. This uncertainty has a ripple effect. It discourages investment, both domestic and foreign. It makes it challenging to attract and retain skilled personnel. The instability created by the freeze undermines the very foundation upon which sustainable development is built. The USAID freeze extends beyond immediate program disruptions. It has damaged the US's reputation as a reliable partner. This damage could have long-lasting consequences for US-Africa relations. For decades, the US has been a significant player in African development. It has invested heavily in health, education, and governance programs. The freeze has eroded the trust built over these years. African nations are now wary of relying on US aid. They are seeking alternative partners. This shift could have significant geopolitical implications. The freeze aligns with the Trump administration's America First agenda. This agenda prioritizes domestic interests over foreign aid. While proponents argue that it allows the US to focus on its own challenges, critics warn of the consequences. They argue that retreating from global engagement creates a vacuum. This vacuum can be filled by countries like China and Russia. These countries have been increasing their influence in Africa. They are investing heavily in infrastructure and development projects. The USAID freeze provides them with an opportunity to further their interests. This shift in geopolitical dynamics could have long-term implications for the US and its role in the world.